me call on our next question. Will be coming from the chairman and CEO of the Manila Times, Mr. Dante Clink and II. Go ahead, Mr. An.
Thank you, Daphne. Good evening to you all. I'm glad to hear that many of you are interested in education and the economy because my question is related to that. According to one estimate, the Philippines has about 460,000 seafarers before the pandemic. I believe that number has been severely reduced since then. Still, Filipinos outnumber other nationalities in the pool of seafarers. However, the Filipino seafarers, about 55,000 before the pandemic, working for European flag carriers, may be blacklisted if the European Maritime Safety Agency, or EMSA, finds that the Philippines has failed to comply with the 1978 standards of training, certification, and watchkeeping, or SCTW convention. Even the Maritime Industry Authority, or Marina, is not optimistic, and it warned that the Philippines will likely get a negative EMSA report, according to a story in the Manila Times last December. The question is, what bills or amendments are necessary to improve the national standards on maritime training, education, and certification in order to protect the interests of Filipino seafarers and their dependents?
Okay. Secretary Belhica.
The problem really with this is that yun pong mga seafarers are being asked, on top of this, are being asked to para bang mag-training pa ulit-ulit ng same trainings and being trained by people who hasn't even gone up the boat. So pagbaba po ng mga seafarers po na yan, wala pong trabaho yan. And asahan na po natin na hindi tayo papasa. In fact, yun na po ang pag-uusapan dyan. So we have to prepare. The government has to prepare for these people, to give them jobs, to give them resources. And that's why I said, one is to take care, fund agriculture, open up the Philippine Venture Capital Funds so that we can put money dito po sa mga kumpanya nagsara at mga SMEs na gusto magsimula ay meron pong kapital na makuha.
Okay. Secretary Panelo.
Ang nakikita ko pong problema dyan, kailangan ang gobyerno natin ay magpasa ng batas kung saan lilika po tayo ng mga eskwela para sa kanila. Kinakailangan kumuha tayo ng mga eksperto sa labas ng bansa at pag-aralin po natin at gawin nating libre sapagat ang katotohanan naman po dyan, mga seamen, seafarers, talaga mahihirap yun. Otherwise, hindi naman pupunta sa ibang bansa para magtrabaho. Pakahirap sa dagat. Kaya kailangan po talaga, kung bumabagsak yung galing ng mga Pilipinong seafarers ay dahil sa kakulangan ng aral at ng training. So, lumika po tayo, magsusulong po ako kung ako'y maging senador, ng isang batas na lilika ng libreng eskwelahan para dito sa mga seamen at seafarers at kumuha tayo ng mga eksperto upang sila ay may train, upang lumakas ang grupong yan.
Okay, Deputy Speaker Rodante Marcoleta.
Nakakalungkot po yung tinuran po ninyo, Dr. Ang, pero yan ay manifestasyon po lamang ng napakalaking problema ng education system sa ating bansa. Sa totoo lang po, ang Department of Education for 25 years ay nilalabag po niya yung Republic Act 8047 na kung saan doon ay sinabi na sa kanila na wag na silang gagawa ng libro. Ito'y ipagkatiwala na lang sa private sector publishers. But after 25 years, the DepEd is in continuing contravention of that law. Yung pong sinabi ninyo ay tama. Manifestation lamang ng babang pagkilala ng Department of Education sa mga batas na ginagawa ng Kongreso. At kailangan po, in the context of your question, yung mga seafarers natin, kailangan talagang makakuha tayo ng mga magtuturo sa kanila, competent, at saka yung mga pasilidad nila para sa ganoon ma-fast track natin yung pag-i-standardize ng kanilang mga skills at yung pag-certify po na kailangan po ng kanilang employers.
Okay, Senator Honasan.
Dr. Clink, our approach to this situation, whether through legislation or executive action, must be data-driven and science-based. We must derive the data from those who are on the ground. We must conduct a quantitative and qualitative inventory of every Filipino seafarers, domestic helpers, teachers all over the world, so that we can hammer out policy. Let me add, partly in response also to an earlier question by Dr. Anna, that we are managing time here. Whether it's elections or attending to the immediate needs of our disenfranchised seafarers, we must be sure that we are faster than the situation on the ground.
Thank you. Senator Ejercito.
Our most precious resource is our human resource. Kaya nga po ang ating OFWs, pati ang mga seafarers, ay in demand sa buong mundo. Kung ganyan yung balitang yan ay nakakalungkot, pero we just have to level up. No, we have to improve our training. We have to re-educate and probably establish more training centers so that we will make sure that our human resource, our OFWs, our seafarers, should always be a cut above the rest. Kahit hanggang ngayon, sila pa rin po ang most sought after, but probably we just have to improve the standards. We have to level up and improve the training centers para na sa ganun ay magtuloy-tuloy pa rin na mabigyan ng pagkakataon ng mas maganda buhay kanilang pamilya. No? They are our modern day heroes. No? Kahit na mahirap ang buhay sa ibang, lalo na po sa laot, sa ibang bansa, they are still there for their families. Kaya nga po, we have to maintain that we have to be a cut above the rest. We have to improve our training. We have to establish, we have to level up again our training methods for our OFWs and seafarers.
Hey, Mr. Jess Aranza.
We have to enact laws that will serve as criteria for establishing school, setting standards for teaching, and even apprenticeship. Because these are things that are so important. I have seen the Maritime School in San Fernando, La Union. My wife is from that place. And I pity them. Walang dating. Ibig sabihin, talagang sa tingin ko, hindi nag-aaral, bubulak-bulang yung mga estudyante. So, selection, standardization, higpitan po natin yan. Parang naghigpit ang flying, if you recall, nung private yung iba, nung pinasukan ng Philippine Airlines ang aviation school, maganda ang mga pilotong lumalabas. Bakit? Kumpleto sila ng standard, kumpleto ng training, at kumpleto ng apprenticeship you're flying. That should be the case. Stricter and high standard level of teaching.
Thank you. Dr. Mengita Padilla.
Nakakalungkot talaga, pati ito nangyayari sa mga seafarer schools ay isang reflection lang ng ating educational system. Hindi lang dito, ang dami. Marami sa kanila, mga high school, hindi marunong magbasa. Shocking, no? So something is very wrong with the educational system. Now, hindi tayo magi-give up dito. Agree ako sa marami sa kanila. Dapat may batas, level up, ano bang kakulangan? We can get experts from abroad, lagyan ng pera, bigyan natin ng tunay na eskwela na may mga equipment. Because nowadays, high-tech na equipment baka wala tayong ganun. Tapos ang dami-dami mga eskwela na walang standards. We have to be stricter now with the standards. So it can be done, but we have to admit first that there's a problem. No? So once there's a problem, matuto tayo sa mga eksperto sa abroad, we can even have review classes, paggastusan ho natin. So as a senator, I will enact a law for this. Kasi we need our seafarers, not only are they OFWs, dapat proud tayo sa kanila. We have always been a seafaring country.
Ms. Noor Mahal Kiram.
Yes po, siguro magkaano po tayo ng bill na may proper education, free education, pati po yung pagpapadala sa ibang bansa, mas maganda po yun. Dapat po meron din tayong complete facilities at the same time, mga equipments. Kasi yun po ang kulang sa atin dito. Kaya nga po yung mga trainings nila, hindi makumpleto. Yung substandard po yung way of education nila. Kasi po wala po tayong facilities, yung complete facilities and equipments. Thank you po.
Okay. Mr. Ding Diaz.
Hanggang sa huli, hindi po mawawala ang aking pagtitiwala sa kakayahan ng mga Pilipino. Kung nagkakaroon man po ng kakulangan, kaya po sa mga international standards ay hindi po pumapasa ang ating training, ang pwede ko pong sisihin dito ay ang mga nagre-regulate ng industriya po nito. O yung pong sinabi nga po ninyo, yung marina. I would agree, again, it goes back to education. Even training goes to education. And kahit na po anong ganda naman ng education po natin, if there are no proper facilities that would aid them in their training, wala pong mangyayari po dito. Again, I would like to say, hindi lamang ho sa mga seafarers, kung hindi sa lahat po ng ating mga kababayan na naghahangat ng magandang kinabukasan. Kaya po natin mag-excel, kaya po nating umangat sa ating pamumuhay. Ang kailangan po lamang natin tamang suporta ng mga namumuno sa ating bayan.
Okay, Yusek Pimentel.
The Filipino seafarers are the #1 competition of European seafarers. Itong move ng Europe to blacklist the Filipinos sa seafaring industry is not just a political but also an economic move. Huwag nating bigyan ng pagkakataon ang mga European to blacklist the Philippines because we know that around the world, it is the Filipinos that is very highly required ang kanilang mga trabaho. Even the seafarers, we have so many seafarers that have excelled. That is why all the shipping industries in the world are taking the Filipinos. In fact, the Europeans, during my term in the Commission on Filipinos Overseas, came to the Philippines to study the seafaring industry of the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you. And Secretary Manny Piñol.
The huge demand for Filipino seafarers actually resulted in the mushrooming of so many maritime schools, fly-by-night yung iba, and that actually resulted in the deterioration of the standards. Now, the thing that should be done here is first audit and evaluate existing schools, and then come up with a refresher course which would be compliant to the European Union standards. Wala tayong magawa dahil sila nag-employ. We have to come up with refresher courses that would be compliant to EU protocols on maritime services. And yung mga hindi papasa, then we will have to provide them with livelihood opportunities. We don't even have to enact the legislation to do this.
Thank you, Secretary. I think one of the issues is that there's confusion on which agency is responsible. I think for a time, this was being tossed between Marina and the Commission on Higher Education. I think DepEd is not part of the situation here, but there are even some complaints among schools that even the regulations or policies change over time. I heard one school invested millions of pesos in a simulator because they were required to do so, only to find out later when policies change that simulators are no longer required. My question is, what laws, what bills will you introduce in the Senate to address the situation?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Isa sa mga dapat nating ipasa is that the requirement for maritime institutions to have a facility for the training. Kasi marami tayong schools, maritime industry institutions na walang facility to train. In fact, there should be partnership between the government, the maritime institution, and the foreign agency or the foreign company to bring in a ship that is world-class for the training of our seafarers.
Okay, any follow-up?
I think that's one of the problems. And ironically, the Philippines is a maritime country.
Yes.
Testified by the fact that we man most of the world's vessels, except that our maritime industries are underdeveloped relative to other countries. In fact, one of the criticisms in the Philippines is that we have one of the worst maritime safety records in the world. So maybe I'd like to hear what laws you would like to propose in the Senate to remedy this problem.
Okay, let's get specific for the laws. Go ahead.
We could remedy this by having a law on because this is about education sa ating maritime industry. There are a lot of foreign governments that are willing to send in their teachers in the maritime industry. That's a partnership that we should build on as well.
Go ahead, Mr. Belgica.
The problem with the maritime industry is nag-pop up nga ho yung mga eskwelahan na hindi naman nagdi-deliver ng tamang pag-aaral, pinagkapirahan yung mga seaman. So this is an opportunity, and this is the right time for government to put up schools that will put up the right standards and get the right professors and trainers to train these seamen. Dahil po, ang nirireklamo di ba mga seaman, yung mga nagtuturo daw sa kanila, hindi pa raw nakatapak ng barko. So that's a problem why the Philippines has went down its quality.
Okay. Go ahead, Secretary Pinal.
Ang una dapat na i-resolve siguro is saan ba dapat yung ating maritime schools? Should it be with SED or Marina? Number two, kung gagawa man tayo ng batas, dapat yung batas na yun na magsiset ng standards for allowing a school to operate as a maritime school.
Thank you. Dr. Padilla?
Yeah, basically, kailangan ng Maritime Standardization Education Act. Parang ganon, no? Para standardize lahat. Like nangyari noon sa mga nurses, nag-crop up yung mga mushrooming of nursing schools sa puro substandard kasi maraming kailangan ng nurse. Same thing happened here. We have to have standards. Tapos yung permits, very strict sa permits. Kasi doon din nagkakaroon ng problema. So, Standardization Act for Maritime Education and stricter tayo sa giving permits. And that includes, the standardization includes everything. Everything.
Thank you.
One of the complaints po of the private education sector is that there is too much regulation. In fact, a lot of them are complaining that even as there are measures in government, for example, raising the salary of teachers, it only applies to those working in the public education system, but not to those in private. So it results in an uneven playing field. For those who are espousing free education, right? What do we do about the private education or private maritime schools that have invested private capital for a public good?
Go ahead, Mr. Marcoleta.
I think the oversight function of Senate should be strengthened along that line, Dr. Because these too much regulations must be studied, and Congress, I think, is in a position, particularly the Senate, to look into which regulations are harming the particular interest or the concerns of these maritime schools. Let us also accredit the schools. There should be a legislative action to accredit the schools so that masiguro po natin ang skills and standards na kinakailangan po para maproteksyonan ang ating mga seafarers.
By the way, thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm not yet a doctor, pero sinusulat ko na po ang dissertation ko. Malapit na po, but thank you for the promotion po.
Mr. Ang. Okay, let's hear from Secretary Belhica.
The tuition fee voucher fund po ang aking pinopropose dyan, where the students will choose which school he wants to go to. So meron siyang voucher na dadalhin sa kahit anong eskwelahan na gusto niyang puntahan para siya po mamimili ng pinakamahusay na eskwelahan na the least cost, instead of having the scholarship program na binibigay mo po sa eskwelahan and then students. This way, we will get the best schools giving the best services at the least cost na choice ng estudyante.
Okay, I saw your hand, Ms. Kiram. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello. Dahil sa too much regulation, siguro mas maganda kung magkakaroon ng monitoring side dito sa national. Kasi pag minsan, dahil sa backing system, kung halimbawa mataas yung position ng nasa nakakapasok. So yung standardization is bumababa. Siguro mas maganda yung may monitoring talaga dito sa sa national.
Okay, Mr. Aranza.
Hindi lang ho sa standard. Yan ay maganda, pero kailangan din i-screen natin ang mga papasok. Sa Philippine Airlines, out of 1,500 na nagpasok sa non-paying, only 15 ang kinuha. 1 month ang examination every other day. So, ganun din dapat because alam mo mas mahirap daw ang barko iliko kaysa sa aeroplano. Andun yan. Milya-milyahe ka bago ka makaliko. Kaya tandaan nyo, mas mahirap. Practical. Totoo yan.
Thank you. Secretary Panelo.
Babalikan ko po yung original na proposal ko na isang legislation na lumikha ng free school for seafarers na kukuha tayo ng mga eksperto para matuto itong mga kababayan natin. Pangalawa, alam po ninyo, kailangan libre para magkaroon ng kompetensya dito sa mga private schools para i-improve nila. Pag nakita nila na itong libre, mas okay pala. I-upgrade nila mga sarili nila.
Actually, Asik Pimentel mentioned something very interesting, and I find it ironic that we have the best seafarers in the world, except that most of them are working abroad. And that, I think, is a testament to the state of our maritime industries. And I was wondering if you have any bills in mind that will help strengthen the maritime industries.
He asked Secretary Belhica, and then we go to Senator Honasan.
Yeah, yun nga po ang problema meron tayong mga libre, pero libreng bulok. Mga libreng eskwelahan, pero wala namang gamit, wala namang teacher. Kaya nga po, babalik na rin natin sa sitwasyon. If you have a tuition fee voucher fund, then the student can choose the best school for the least cost. So mga eskwelahan will raise their standards according to mga kinakailangan ng mga estudyante to deliver the services or to deliver the education that they need.
Okay, Senator Honasan.
Dr. Klink, a maritime industry inventory and performance audit bill is in order. It must also occupy, our seafarers must occupy a precise location in our national order of priorities. This goes beyond education. There is the funding requirement. Pero once we determine kung nasaan yung seafarers natin, automatic na yung funding. Ibig sabihin, ito lang ang pera natin, ito ang unahin natin. What is their contribution to our GDP? The domestic maritime industry. What is the contribution of the overseas seafarers to our GDP?
It's about 10% of GDP.
That should be the basis.
Total remittances.
Yes, Doctor, that should be the basis for any legislation or executive action.
Senator JV, you're... Oh, go ahead. Mr. Marcoleta? Oh.
Dr. Padilla, kanina po may sinabi kayo na legislation ang sagot dito. Pero yung sa tanong po ni Dr. Ang kanina there is an imminent danger talaga na kailangan talagang ayusin na sapagkat kapag hindi natin na-address ito, kawawa po yung mga seafarers na talagang matatanggal at pati kanilang pamilya. Alam naman po natin ang legislation magtatagal. Ano po yung, bukod sa legislation, ano po yung ibig niyong sabihin na para ma-address natin ito?
Dr. Padilla.
Ano po, kung kailangan mabilis ho, pwede mag-EO, no? But ang dami mga private schools naman who have better facilities. But they're languishing. Tanong niyo rin yun, no?
Hindi po. Ang EO po kasi ay executive department po yun. Ang pinag-uusapan po natin kung sakaling nasa Senado tayo.
Legislation ho tayo or oversight
kaya nga po, ang legislation po magtatagal. Pinakamadali lamang po dyan yung first reading. Pero pagdating mo sa second and third reading, kung nasa mababa kang kapulungan, pupunta sa Senado, magtatagal kayo
Kung
yan.
declared as urgent, di ba, priority bill, mabilis siya. It will also depend on the executive, di ba? It will also depend on the executive. But can I finish what I was saying? Can I say something about the public-private partnership? Because even sa other schools, the public schools, the private school owners are languishing. Nagko-complain sila, nahulugi sila, wala silang suporta. Maybe a partnership can do. So kung meron na silang equipment, magagamit sila ng mga public. So at least, magtutulungan sila. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Okay, just a reminder that we should let every candidate finish their time before we continue. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Ranza.
Yung tanong ni Mr. Ang kung paano mapaigting ang negosyo ng vessel. Siguro, sa ngayon, mayroon ng bagong 7 ports na nagawa ang San Miguel. Siguro, pwede naman yung foreign vessels, pag dumating, i-unload nila so that the vessels in the Philippines will be one to carry. That way, we can also prevent smuggling. So, marami yung bagay na po pwede. Pero yung sinasabi kong manibis magliko, natabo kayo, ang eroplano pwedeng lumiko kagad. Ang vessel, milya, bago siya unti-unting lumiliko. Meski magtanong po kayo sa mga maritime.
Last year po, the Philippines was assigned as the ASEAN country representative to the European Union. This is a 3-year assignment po from ASEAN. What posture po ba would you recommend that the Philippines could take with regard po to the EMSA regulation and the improvement po of domestic standards in maritime schools?
Who would like to answer that?
May I?
Secretary?
Actually, yung compliance sa EU protocols, hindi lang confined sa maritime. When I was with the DA actually, tinututukan ng EU yung compliance natin sa illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. No? And ang threat was that kapag tinuloy nyo yan, we will ban. The same thing, the same story here. Now, I will agree with Dr. Padilla. Kung mabagal yung legislation, then let's ask the next president to issue an executive order directing Marina to conduct an upgrading of the skills and the training of our maritime people.
Thank you. Anyone would, okay, go ahead. Congressman Marcoleta.
Given my experience in the House of Representatives, kahit na po certified yung bill, talagang magtatagal pa rin po yan because it has to go to the process. Pupunta sa committee, magkakaroon pa ng TWG, pupunta ngayon sa plenary, magdidebate ng napakaraming panahon, hanggang sa mag-second reading and third reading, hanggang sa dumating po sa Senado, kung wala ng BICAM, baka sakali po. But the question is very imminent po eh. Merong threat talaga na mawala. Ang iniisip ko sanang isasagot nila po ay gamitin ng oversight function. Tawagin lahat ang mga responsible offices para gawan ng paraan kagad.
Thank you, Dr. Padilla and Secretary Panelo.
No, actually, Congressman Marcoleta, sinabi na naman yung kaninang oversight function sa mga nangyayari ngayon, no? Pero bukod ho doon, siguro kung magaling ang ating next president, ay makikita niya yung urgency. Pwede siya mag-EO na, executive order. Bakit ka pa mag-oversight? Hearing pa rin ho yun, di ba?
Magaling talaga po yung susunod na president.
Okay, thank
Dapat
you.
magaling yung susunod na presidente.
Okay, Secretary Panelo.
Iniisip ko, balikan natin yung kanina na nabanggit dito na maraming problema din yung mga private training school. Aba, di kung may problema sila sa pondo, ay bigyan natin ng pondo. And then, gawin natin stricto ang paggamit ng pondo. May mga requirements tayo, kailangan maging compliant sila. Para nakakatulong na tayo, nagiging stricto pa tayo, at nakakatulong din sa industriya. Yan po ang pinakamagandang gagawin ng ating gobyerno.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Belgica.
I think the problem lies with Marina dahil sa kanila bumagsak ang level ng pag-aaral. So maybe we should just remove the entire thing from the Marina and put it in another department na mag-i-improve talaga ng quality in education na tinuturo po sa mga seafarers natin. Dahil sobra pong reklamo dyan sa Marina na natanggap ko ng aking opisina, and I think this what happened here is a result of their failure.
The problem there is that the agency that might be responsible is the Commission on Higher Education, and there are already people who are complaining that the CHED is imposing unreasonable regulation on private schools. In fact, there is a bill pending in the House, House Bill 10282, which will make all SUCs an instrument of the national government. And I think there's grave concern among not only the SUCs, but the entire tertiary education system about this particular House bill.
Okay, any reaction? Go ahead, Secretary Panelo.
May naisip po ako, ito bang mga seafarers natin, ito ba ang karamihan nito'y mahihirap? Ito bang karamihan nito'y mga hindi nakatapos sa edukasyon? Kasi may problema tayo kahit yung Tertiary Act. Alam po ba ninyo, na 12% lang ng pinakamahihirap ang nakakapasok ng free education. At 17% ang galing sa mayayaman at 64% ang nasa middle class. At nahihirapan po sa pagpasa kasi nga ang problema, ang mahihirap, kulang siyempre sa meron silang mga proctor, meron silang mga trainee, iba. Kaya lang may problema talaga tayo yung portion.
Thank you. Any follow-up? Okay, go ahead. We have room for two more.
With regards to the too much regulation complaint of the Marina, the President has issued and implemented ARTA and the ease of doing business. This is the first step towards that. I believe that what is important is that we adopt a modernization of our, we should be data-driven. Like for example, right now, Marina, the Marina should have the exact numbers of Filipinos, where they are, and even I'm saddened that the Marina was not included in the Department of Migrant Workers.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Piñol.
May I just go back to an earlier concern raised by Dr. Ang? Yung paano natin i-improve yung ating local maritime industry. Alam nyo, yung mga barko natin napakaluma na. Ang iba dyan, World War II vintage. And napakabagal, napakamahal. In fact, it is more expensive to ship banana from Mindanao to Manila than to ship the bananas from Davao to Japan. So kailangan talagang tutukan ito at magpasa tayo ng batas na dapat may age limit yung mga barkong ginagamit sa ating...
You're correct, Secretary. The problem is in 2015, the Senate passed, the Congress passed the cabotage law.
Yeah.
Except that since 2015, all of the benefits that were expected from the passage of that law remain unrealized. And as you said, mas mahal po magpadala ng cargo from Cagayan de Oro to Manila than it is from Manila to Hong Kong, despite 7 years of the cabotage law.
Well, Since 6 years na po yun, I think it's due for review. And Congressman Rolex Suplico would know the process involved in the review of an existing law.